Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella window and door of Georgia. And we are still hashtag go for 2 and 22, although on Saturday it seemed like some of that might be derailed. Georgia got all it wanted and more against Missouri, but credit to the Dogs for stepping it up, persevering, and coming away with a win. Although it is the kind of win that leaves you with a lot of questions about where Georgia is right now, what it needs to do to get where it wants to go, and exactly where is it going next. We'll try to address all of that both today and throughout the week. Busy show for us. It's John Stinchcomb coming up here in a couple of moments. Good day to have John on the show because obviously one of the biggest issues related to what happened to Georgia on Saturday was with the offensive line and what seems to be a group that right now is really struggling, and I think you're left to conclude that we are nowhere close to knowing who this team's true best five is right now. So we'll talk to John Stinchcomb about that coming up in a moment. Mike Griffith is on the scene in Auburn today, who Georgia plays on Saturday. It's a media day for Auburn going into that game against the Dogs. So we'll catch up with Mike before we're done for a couple of minutes late on the show there as well to get some thoughts on who Georgia's about to play and kind of what he saw from afar on Saturday. Mike was covering Auburn at the LSU-Auburn game on Saturday, so we'll get a couple of thoughts from Mike related to all of that. I'm going to begin today's show by using a word that, boy, everybody who hates UGA seemed really happy about using on Saturday. And I think that Kirby Smart actually had a pretty interesting take related to this topic. We're going to let you hear that. We're going to get some into the Darnell Washington stuff, and we're going to probably do more of that later on this week. And Kirby Smart not holding back, pretty strong criticism, or at least an evaluation that was critical of a pretty key position group there for UGA. So this is one of those days where you just kind of try to figure out what's going on. We're going to try to be as honest as we possibly can, and we're going to try to roll through it all here. A lot of folks came out of the woodworks on Saturday to say, see, I told you Georgia's not very good. Well, how does Georgia fix what folks say is not very good right now? We'll talk about all of that. And we're glad to have you with us as we do. As DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So it's a really weird experience being in Columbia, Missouri on Saturday before the game, you know, walking around and talking to a lot of Missouri fans, in some cases even Missouri students. They were all really nice and really gracious, but really gave themselves no chance in the game whatsoever. They were like, hey, while you're here, you should try this restaurant, you know, whatever. They were, you know, more kind of seeing themselves like hospitality type committee and not like rabid fans the way that you typically see in the SEC. And then lo and behold, you know, a couple of moments into the game, you know, they get a couple of turnovers, they get an early lead. And my gosh, if you're watching on TV, if you were actually in the stadium, you know this is true. Everything changed so quickly. And it's, you know, even for a place like Missouri, which is kind of, I think, of sort of a remote outpost, when it comes to the SEC, it's just funny how true this can be, that it just doesn't take much for one of these home crowds, especially on a Saturday night, and that's why night games are always so valuable. It doesn't take much, especially on a Saturday night, for a home crowd to start believing in itself a little bit. And I thought that Missouri crowd really brought some juice into this game on Saturday. And lo and behold, and I even put this out on Twitter at one point, you know, my entire mindset changed at some point in this game. You know, early first half, you know, Georgia's got the turnovers and they're just kind of scuffling around. And, you know, I'm sort of thinking in my mind, oh, here's another example of Georgia kind of playing down to the level of its opponent. Dogs were, of course, more than a 4-touchdown favorite in the game. Or here's the Georgia team, once again, kind of dealing with a slow start, but sort of just keeping it kind of compartmentalized to that. And then at another moment, and for me, this kind of came early third quarter when coming out of the locker room, when Georgia was going to set the tone for the second half. You know, they'd shoot up a bunch of clock. They ran, like a 16-play drive and had to settle for a field goal again in the red zone. And the Missouri kicker on the other side was sort of matching Georgia field goal for field goal there for a little bit. All of a sudden, I had to sort of consider the possibility, oh my gosh, Georgia may actually really lose this game. That it kind of started feeling like South Carolina 2019 all over again. That was a home game. This is a road game. But one of those days in which maybe it's just not going to happen for Georgia. Maybe in some of the ways even Missouri was even defending Georgia sort of felt like what South Carolina was doing that particular day, years in the past, that you just sort of had to come to grips with the idea of, my gosh, maybe this is going to be the worst possible case scenario, and Georgia's going to lose in unforeseeable fashion to a team, Missouri, that just lost to Auburn the previous week and then gotten blown out by Kansas State a couple of weeks prior to that. But you had to consider the possibility that might happen. Now, Georgia didn't. They ended up winning the game, and we'll give credit to them for that and the resiliency they showed and some of the things that Kirby Smart talked about. But a game like this brings out a lot of Georgia haters. And a lot of Georgia haters, whether it be folks that you know in your life, that you kind of, interact with in social media, or just people sort of shouting to the void on Twitter and things like that. It's funny how every Georgia hater seemed to have the exact same take about this game on Saturday. I want to show you, if you're watching a video, just kind of a snapshot of this. Every single person seemed to be asking the question or seemed to be making the statement that Georgia got exposed. That was the word that got used. Georgia exposed? It's a little early, but Georgia might be getting exposed. I knew that Georgia was going to get exposed eventually. Ha, ha, ha. Y'all got exposed. Over and over again. I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 examples just on the screen that I found pretty easily and quickly. Some of those are even sent to me for people who interact with me because they don't like Georgia very much, of the idea that Georgia and what happened against Missouri on Saturday, that it got exposed. And exposed is one of those sort of great, sort of hot takey words, because what it kind of means is that we're all learning something that the person using the word exposed has known for a while, that the so-and-so team that's getting exposed was never very good. And it's the kind of thing that sort of puts the person using that word kind of above everybody else. If I knew Georgia wasn't very good, now y'all all know it because Georgia got exposed. Well, as it turns out, Kirby was actually asked that after the game on Saturday about whether or not that Georgia, in struggling and being down for a large portion of this game, if this was an example of UGA being exposed. And I didn't think Georgia played very well on Saturday. I'll be honest with you about that. But I actually thought Kirby gave a really good answer to this question about, the nature of being exposed in a game like this. Let me let you hear Kirby on whether or not he thought Georgia was exposed on Saturday.
Well, every game's been exposed to something. I mean, we got exposed on defense the week before, and we worked on things to help with that, and it helped us, right? So they did some really good things tonight that, sure, I don't know if expose is the right word, but they certainly did some good things that, guess what? We got to have some answers for, and we got to get answers for them fast. It starts with getting some wideouts healthy and being able to run the ball.
I think that's actually a really good answer from Kirby. That I just think that exposed doesn't necessarily have to be a bad word. The reason why it sometimes sort of feels like a bad word in kind of the the sort of sports talky world we might live in on social media or like streaming video podcast stuff like this is because it's the kind of word that a lot of idiots use. But here's how you can spot an idiot when it comes to a word like exposed. If someone's using something that's happening in the present tense to either relitigate the past or to make some sort of wild claim about the future, well, that's an idiot, and that's someone that can be easily ignored. In other words, there are some people who are going to take a game like this and say, well, see, I told you Georgia was never good to begin with, and the national championship was just a fluke. That's an idiot that you can easily ignore. And by the way, some of those calls are coming from inside the house. It may be Georgia fans themselves who are also saying that. But if someone's using something that's happening in the present to relitigate, to make a claim about something that happened in the past, well, clearly you can ignore that person. Here's something else. If someone's using what happened there on Saturday to make some sort of wild claim about what's going to happen in the future, well, I told you, Georgia was not going to be any good. They're going to lose to Tennessee. They're going to lose twice. They're going to, whatever. Look, these are the same people that told you that Georgia couldn't win the national championship last year. We see abundant evidence of their inability to make accurate predictions. So based on what happened in this game on Saturday, it can't be used to make any kind of claim about the future because the fact is these games just are not that easy to predict. So that's the kind of stuff you can ignore. Using what happened on Saturday against Missouri to either reevaluate the past or make some sort of wild, bold claim about the future, that can be easily ignored. But if you want to have the conversation in the present of what happened for Georgia here this week, what it means for Georgia right now, I think that's totally fair. And I think that Kirby Smart's statement a moment ago kind of gives you, some of that too, that hey, every game exposes something. So I think the thing that we should ask, if we want to kind of sort of figure out what's going on with Georgia right now, is if Georgia was exposed or if there were things about Georgia that are exposed, what was it that was exposed? What did we learn about Georgia here in this particular moment? And I think we learned some things that are unfortunately not all that pleasant, not all that kind about Georgia here right now. There are massive struggles along the offensive line. We're going to get more into that here coming up in a moment. Stetson Bennett was not particularly accurate. That is certainly true. Now, I think he played better as the game went on, but there were some moments, especially early, when Stetson was just kind of misfiring a little bit. And the guys that Stetson's throwing to, they're not doing a very good job of creating separation. There are just not playmakers emerging in this wide receiver room for Georgia here right now. Now, Dominic Blaylock had a couple nice moments, and it's not all negative, but it's also not glowingly positive either. That with A.D. Mitchell injured and not playing, Georgia pretty clearly is missing a spark from its wide receiver room right now that was abundantly on display there on Saturday. And for all the issues the offensive line has, when it comes to the overall story of the Georgia rushing attack, some of us have been sort of sneakily suspecting that things weren't quite right with that group a lot here this season. And once again on Saturday, you had more reason to think that. Now, the overall numbers don't look bad. And frankly, the overall numbers for the Georgia rushing attack haven't looked terrible all year necessarily. But you've just been left to conclude that just something doesn't quite feel right. And I think Saturday was another data point exposing that too, that, yeah, this is not quite RBU style, running play from Georgia right now for whatever reason. That those are things that are kind of exposed from this game on Georgia on Saturday. And to me, it leads to, I believe, 3 quick points of what I'd like to see from Georgia going forward here. That at a certain point, the worst phrase in the world is, it is what it is. But with certain things related to Georgia, it kind of is what it is. You're not going to magically get better on your offensive line overnight. And guys that are not creating separation as wide receivers aren't going to magically start doing that. And, other, areas in which guys aren't necessarily, dominating on an individual basis, that's not going to miraculously change just because you want it to. But that doesn't also mean that Georgia doesn't have some areas in which it has succeeded that it could lean more into in the future here. So on the basis of what I saw on Saturday against Missouri, here are 3 things that I think that Georgia needs to do a whole lot more of. Y'all, they're just not throwing to Brock Bowers enough. And I don't know what this is about. We've played the audio for you after the last, not Saturday's game, the 2 games prior to that. And when Kirby Smart was asked about Brock Bowers, he sort of pivoted away from Bowers and started talking about Darnell Washington as if he didn't kind of want to, put the spotlight solely on Bowers. And look, I get you don't want to put one player above the rest of the team, but Brock Bowers is above the rest of the offense. He's the only game-breaking, game-changing player on this offense. It's been obviously true now for more than a year. And if you don't use him, you're holding him hostage because he's the only guy that, right now he's the only guy on this offense that has the look of a future first-round pick in the NFL draft. And if you're not using him to his utmost potential, then I think from a play calling standpoint, you're greatly failing. And Saturday was a day in which you really needed the yards, and you could have gotten more yards had you simply thrown the ball to Bowers more. When you're blowing teams out, you can throw whoever you want to. But when you're in a close game, when you're in a fight for your life, you could have made this an easier win, I believe, by giving the ball to Bowers more. And if you look at, the inconsistency in terms of how he's been used this season, just 2 catches week 1 against Oregon. He's had 5 catches in each of the last, 3 weeks. But I don't think you can afford to have your best player not be a big part of your offense in any game. Now, it didn't matter against Oregon because Georgia was dominating that game. But it's going to matter going forward because he's the only guy on this offense that is creating green grass, separation, obvious visual separation between the guy that's covering him. And when you got to do it against an even better opponent than Missouri, if you're not throwing it to Brock Bowers, you're just making a huge mistake. You're just making a huge mistake. And I'd say the same thing a little bit when it comes to throwing the ball to Kenny McIntosh. Because that's another thing with the offense that you don't necessarily have to have an amazing offensive line to be able to do, because you're not going to just magically have 5 road graders along your offensive line. But you don't necessarily need that to get the ball out quickly to Bowers and let him do something in the open field. Same thing with McIntosh there as well. Now, some of this may be related to the fact that McIntosh is just kind of injured and banged up, has what thigh contusion, I guess it's been called. Did play on Saturday, but maybe a little bit banged up right now. But when you look at McIntosh in the game against Missouri on Saturday, just 1 catch. Also just 1 catch for him against South Carolina there as well. But against Oregon week 1, he had 9 catches. Now, you may say, well, that's just because that's what the defense was giving you. But y'all, here's the thing you got to understand. I know coaches love to say, hey, we're going to take what the defense gives us. But if all you ever do is take what the defense gives you, then all you're ever going to have is what the defense wants you to have. And I think that Georgia has to be a little bit more assertive in dictating the pace of the game in its own right. What can you do well, and how much of that are you able to do during a game? And right now, one of the things that Georgia might be able to do to mitigate against the fact that it's just not going to line up and run the ball quite as well as it has in the past, and it's not going to get a wide receiver right now off on a really big season, at least not until A.D. Mitchell comes back, then you've got to throw the ball to running backs more, and McIntosh was the guy who was that target for you in the Oregon game to begin the season. And you're going to have to find more of that as time goes on. And then for me, the third thing is, and this is another thing that was sort of weirdly absent from the game against Missouri, but had Georgia done it more, it could have made the game a little bit easier. For everything you want to say about Stetson Bennett and, some inaccurate throws from him, especially in the first half of this game, the one thing that Bennett has proven to be a real weapon with and was not utilized at all on Saturday is with his legs. That you are only getting a portion of Stetson Bennett's value if you're not making him a very active part of this offense when it comes to his own running game. That he's had a rushing touchdown in each of Georgia's first 4 games of this year and didn't have one on Saturday. Now, when you look at the overall rushing numbers for Bennett, they actually don't necessarily look that good because you got to remember that in college football, sack yardage is compiled as, quarterback running yardage. They don't do that in the NFL. They do that when it comes to college football. So some of the overall numbers for Bennett may not look as good as they could, and that's maybe a little bit less of an accurate picture overall. But Bennett is a much more valuable threat to this offense in terms of his ability to run, because the difference between a Bennett run and a running back run is oftentimes running back runs are predictable. You know when they're likely to occur. But a quarterback run oftentimes comes at a more unpredictable moment because maybe it comes when a play breaks down, or maybe you can really kind of throw that in there when the defense is expecting something else. But it can be a really efficient part of an offense. And on Saturday, Georgia just didn't do that enough. So the overall bottom line for me is this. What got exposed about Georgia on Saturday was not just that it played a game that was closer than it's supposed to be. What got exposed for me is there were things that Georgia could have done on Saturday to still make this an easier win than it turned out to be. They could have thrown the ball to Bowers. If McIntosh was out there, they could have even thrown to him a little bit more. They could have gotten Bennett more involved with his legs. If you're dealing with issues with your offensive line, if you're dealing with issues with your wide receiver, if you're dealing with issues with your traditional passing game, and on Saturday Georgia kind of was, then be a little more creative about how you use the established playmakers you have. And a game that was close could have actually been a little bit of an easier win than it was on Saturday. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and we're happy to have you with us no matter how you join us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We also speak to you at 9:45 on DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app, and however you are a part of our show. We just really appreciate you being here. Good days, bad days, something in between. You can sort of decide for yourself what Saturday was against Missouri. But either way, we're just happy to have you as a part of our discussion. A big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. They can equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. As we head towards a time in which it's going to start being colder outside, you kind of have that heat cranked up on the inside of your house. We're heading towards late fall, winter, and some of that sort of cold weather time of the year. All the better opportunity for you to have those really efficient windows and doors and that expensive heat staying inside your house where it's supposed to be, and that cold weather and all the things that go along with that cold weather staying on the outside where that's supposed to be there as well. That is what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. And you've heard me talk about it. You know that homeowners around the Atlanta area have recognized this as a brand leader in survey after survey for years, and now you want to experience that for yourself. And the best way to do that is to have one of those no-pressure consultations with a Pella expert who can talk to you about the product and which, choices for windows and doors right for you, all the installation options that are available for you there as well. And they can tell you about the great savings opportunities that are there for you too, because between now and October 31st, you can get 10% off your entire project or a reduced rate of 6.99% for 120 months. So make sure you check that out from our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia today. Stop by and see them in their Experience Center right there in Duluth, or reach out to them online at pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. You can also give them a call, 678-638-1496. That's 678-638-1496. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. We're going to talk to John Stinchcomb here in a moment, and one of the things we're going to talk to John about, him being a former All-American offensive lineman at Georgia, the current state of Georgia's offensive line, and what does not look to be a very stellar state based on how it performed against Missouri on Saturday. I want to keep that topic going as well as we go around the doghouse here today, assisted by our friends at AAA. And when you look at, why Georgia was not able to run the football a little bit more, why Georgia was not able to truly establish itself throughout most of this game, late stages, that sort of change, but why Georgia wasn't really able to establish itself more on the ground than it did on Saturday. Listen, Kirby Smart, to his credit, did not holding back on saying exactly what he saw and what he thought was going on. He did it in typical sort of colorful Kirby Smart fashion. I have edited this. I probably didn't need to necessarily, but we try to lean in the direction of being pro-family around here. So this is Kirby Smart, his assessment of what happened up front with his offensive line, trying to create some opportunities for the Georgia rushing attack. Smart not holding back his words. This from Saturday night.
Getting your ass whipped up front. That's what the finger was. Like when you put on pads and you got to strike another man and he's across from you and he weighs 300 and you weigh 300, somebody wins and somebody loses. So the finger is we getting our butts whooped. Okay, now scheme-wise, we can maybe help them out. We can do some different things. We can look and find some things. Gap plays helped us. We ran some gap plays, and that really helped us. But when you're not running the ball well, you're usually getting whipped.
So listen, I think some of y'all around here were probably a little quicker on this topic than I was. Some of y'all had noticed this, I think, early on, and you've been telling me about it. They just sort of felt like this was not a dominant, Georgia offensive line, and I didn't necessarily disagree with you, but I don't think I'd been speaking about that as adamantly as some of y'all had been over the course of the last couple of weeks. I'll give you credit for that. And for a lot of Georgia fans who asked a lot of pointed questions about Stacey Searles when he was hired as offensive line coach. This seemed like a little bit of a weird hire, not an obvious hire that a program like Georgia would make. Some Dog fans didn't have great memories of Searles when he was here as offensive line coach going back, to previous era of the program. All of a sudden, that conversation from the offseason's back in the spotlight again right now as well. Now, listen, I'm not going to, make any kind of evaluation of what Searles is doing here right now, and I'm not even going to pretend to know exactly why this offensive line is not necessarily performing better than it is, because I don't think that it's necessarily performing all that well right now. But as Smart said, the real responsibility here is how do you coach around this? Like, how do you take what you have and still get the most out of what you got going for you right now? Because you're not going to miraculously change this. Guys who are not, creating, those big holes, guys who are not getting that big push, guys who are, as Kirby Smart says, getting, their backsides whipped right now aren't going to, I would assume, miraculously start being the one on the other end of that, whipping somebody else. That's just not likely to happen. But you also can't wave the white flag of surrender either, that you've just got to go with what you have and find a way to be as successful as you possibly can. And that's one of the reasons why this team was probably throwing to running back so much at the beginning of the season, and one of the reasons why they probably need to do that more. It's one of the reasons why that you got to get the ball out to a guy quickly like Bowers and let him do something to make somebody miss, let him create the opportunities offensively for you that other people just aren't necessarily able to do quite as easily. And it's one of the reasons why you're going to have to lean on Stetson Bennett in the running game, because it just kind of comes at more unpredictable times, and it can be a really efficient part of your offense, 4 rushing touchdowns in each of the first 4 games, but not getting one of those on Saturday. But Smart doesn't hold back. That's how I would say serious this is right now. It is clear and obvious that the Georgia offensive line did not win its battle against the Missouri defensive front there on Saturday. And figuring out some way to do better with that, figure out some way to kind of work around that, that is a paramount issue moving forward for UGA, and that is around the doghouse. It's assisted today by our friends at AAA, and of course AAA, when I'm traveling like I was on Saturday, I was flying up to Columbia, but listen, you're still driving from St. Louis over to Columbia for the game, and you're obviously trying to get into and from the airport. There's still a lot of driving that goes with that, so I'm always glad to have that AAA card in my pocket, roadside assistance if I need it, if something goes wrong. But speaking of the potential of things going wrong, that's why you also need great insurance there too, and AAA is a name you ought to know for great insurance. I'm talking about home insurance and auto insurance and all kinds of great incentives to go with that. For instance, when it comes to auto insurance, You can get a free, no-obligation quote right now for AAA Auto Insurance to see if you qualify for the membership discount. It's a paperless discount, pay-in-full discount, multiple car savings, and so much more. So many great discounts and incentives coming your way when you get your auto insurance through AAA. So make sure you give them a call, 833-718-2075. That's 833-718-2075 to find a branch near you and to really take advantage of the great incentives that come your way when you get your auto insurance, your home insurance through our friends at AAA. All right, it's good to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today. We're busy. Mike Griffith, as you may know, was in Auburn on Saturday for the Auburn LSU game, and he's still there now. Georgia's going to play Auburn, obviously, on Saturday, so we'll get an early look at that game and a look back on the Tigers with Mike Griffith here coming up before we're done. But also on a number of issues from the game on Saturday and where Georgia needs to improve and what it says about UGA that they were able to kind of pull this win out. Let's cover all those bases right now. Great guy to have on a show like this today. Let's talk to John Stinchcomb here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll talk to John Stinchcomb here. Always great to have him, especially on days like this when you're going to try to dig deep and sort of figure out what went on. And, John, look, here's the big picture for me. That Georgia's still undefeated, and, they're still obviously with every end-of-season goal still very much in front of them. We all understand that. They showed some resiliency late. They found a way to pull out the victory in a situation when maybe previous Georgia teams might not have, or certainly other teams around college football might not have. We all get that there are still good moments to be had for Georgia here this season. The fact that they did find victory actually kind of keeps a lot of that kind of stuff even more alive. And yet, once you say all of that, there's obviously also a lot that was indicated from that game that clearly are areas in which Georgia needs vast improvement. And that's kind of what I want to focus on with you here for a little bit, specifically along the offensive line. John, what's going on with this group right now, and how come they didn't have more success against the Missouri front than they did on Saturday night?
Yeah, well, I think Coach Smart says it pretty accurately. They got whipped. They got whipped up front. Missouri's defense got after them and won individual battles. As I went back and watched the film last night, my first initial reaction was that our guards and interior struggled early against Missouri, and that would be an inaccurate picture. They were not alone. Our tackles, who I think have been a strength, they had arguably one of their worst games in an overall performance, and a lot of it was not being out of position, but just losing one-on-one battles, something that you don't see very, not with regularity from Roderick Jones and specifically McClendon, who has gone, consistently been one of your better offensive linemen, and just it was across the board. You watch the film and you go, Xavier Truss is a relatively younger player. Inexperience is probably a better term for that. He's had his struggles throughout this season and continued to do that against Missouri. But you add into the fact Cedric Van Granger right next to him. I thought he had one of his worst games. Yeah. So you spread it across the board, and it was at times it seemed early on that they just they didn't have the physicality to match what Missouri was bringing to them, and it's a group that is not they're not dominant. They're not what Georgia has seen in past years. So the details start to really matter, and they don't have that right now. It's across the board. Guys are playing on their toes. They're leaning. Their technique's not great, and they got whipped up front physically. So that's a bad combo. The good news is there's plenty of season left, and they come out with a win, and they can get better. But at the end of the day, that's what they need to do is they need to get better.
So along those lines, and I'm genuinely asking because I don't know, how much can you improve? Because what you're talking about there is about sort of a level of physical dominance they weren't able to assert and the other side was able to. That doesn't, to me, seem like the kind of thing that's likely to change a lot during the season, that that, other positions, maybe you can learn more about technique, or you can learn more about scheme, you can learn more, and that gives you a chance to be better. But offensive line, to me, and you obviously know the position so much better, that's why I'm asking you, because you played it, that to me seems like one of those things where it's about, can you just bend your hips, bow your back, and move a guy? And if you're not doing that now, what is the likelihood you'll be able to do that better later on this year?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a million different ways these guys can improve. And, I think it's different per position, per player. If I watch specifically Broderick Jones and Warren McClendon, for me, it was, I don't know if it was a lack of focus or engagement, but they're in position and they just got beat physically. So coming into that game, maybe they thought they were just better than Missouri. I don't know their mentality, but they should have performed better than they did. For the guards specifically, Xavier and Tate, both of them have great opportunities to improve their technique, be in better position when they engage in block, and they've missed on that. Xavier specifically at times gets out of position just because he tends to play on his toes a little bit. He's a waist bender, so it gets him out of shape, and he can fix those things. I mean, those are all technique issues. Cedric Von Granger, same thing. Sometimes he gets top heavy, and for him and Mims specifically, it looks like at times their eyes are bad. And when I say their eyes are bad, in protection, not super clear as to where they were going and how to get there. So when you get that kind of confusion, it makes you play hesitant. It makes you play slow. So for each one of these guys across the board, there's absolutely ways that they can improve through this season and get better at their craft. And that's what you have to do, because Saturday's performance isn't going away. That's something that each team will look at and say, okay. And as you go through a season, that's what you do. You've got more tape out there, and you're evaluating how do you attack and what can we do to maximize on these opportunities teams are providing. We do the same thing that other teams are trying to do against us. So you go back and, for Coach Searles, it's a great opportunity. A lot has been said of is he a good hire? He's coming in replacing two great offensive line coaches, our previous two. So the bar's been set very high, and it's a combination of veteran players and young players that left a performance on Saturday that is not inspiring and has left great room for improvement. So let's see how that plays out in the direction that it turns, hopefully, throughout this season.
Yeah, I want to get more specifically into that issue with you, because I think what you're saying is really interesting. And there are a lot of fans, John, you and I talked about this at the time, that the hire of Searles just didn't make any sense to them, because they felt like they knew what Searles was as a coach, and it sort of felt like a different kind of hire than you would have expected Kirby Smart to make. And honestly, I don't know if it's too soon to make an evaluation about him in particular and how much of this is related to how these players are being coached up. But the people who weren't happy with the hire of Searles to begin with would seem to feel like they've got some motivation now to sort of stand up and say, see, I told you so. How potentially accurate could that be? Is this one of those things, 5 games into a season, that it is fair to make an evaluation of the guy who's coaching that position group when the group seems to underperform the way they did on Saturday?
Well, it's a great opportunity to figure out it's one direction or the other. It could be, and I don't know this. I mean, I'm not going to come to the defense of Stacy Searles or the players. I'm just going to throw out an option here. It could be that when he walks through the door, he inherits a group of players that feel like they've had it figured out and maybe haven't bought into what he's bringing to the table. And after a game like Missouri, where you're going, all right, fellas, you thought you had it in hand, because you've been told that you're good and you're following on the heel. And let's mention Jamari Salyer, who fell in the draft, and you're going, how is this possible? Just became the starting left tackle for the Chargers and gets a game ball on Sunday. So congrats to him. That was a big deal. I was excited to see it.
Yeah.
For you Falcons fans out there, I'm sure you're going, how did we miss out on that guy? But back to the guys we do have in-house. For Coach Searles, it's now an opportunity. And hopefully everyone's attention is dialed in, and they're aware that that certainly wasn't championship-level football. An offensive line isn't the only place, right? I mean, certainly an area that must improve if we're going to reach the potential that this team still has. And the ceiling is very high. But, you drop a couple balls on third down. You don't create space. You finally get a good run, a more than 10-yard run, and you fumble the ball. So turnovers are huge, drop passes are huge, not executing on assignments up front. All those are issues that, it just takes more attention. It takes attention to detail. If you want a recipe for how a good team loses to an inferior team, Georgia almost executed on that very thing on Saturday. But I think it's also worth noting that a championship mentality says even when our backs are against the wall and things aren't good, we still have faith and trust in one another to overcome it. And it's not a 2019 versus South Carolina situation where, it just looks like, the odds are stacked against us today, boys, and we're not going to be able to pull it through. I mean, it looked rough, stayed rough, and they continued to battle and had the chops to come out with a W. So I think that's commendable as well.
Let me talk about something different here for a moment. I think, John, you've worked in sports media for a long time and obviously been a consumer of sports media your entire life, and I think you would say that the easiest thing for fans to do after a game is kind of get on the offensive play caller. That person is always sort of a lightning rod for criticism, and yet since Todd Monken's been here since the 2020 season, I don't recall really any game, even after losses, 2020 when Georgia was kind of losing pretty big or something like that, I don't really recall Monken ever really getting any criticism at all. He's been pretty popular with the UGA fans kind of since the word go. Saturday felt like a little bit of a different type of thing for me where I was left pretty confused. As I said before you joined us, why isn't Brock Bowers getting 10, 12 touches per game when he's clearly by far and away this team's best offensive player? Why aren't they finding some way to kind of mitigate against the areas in which right now Georgia's just not stellar? You can't overnight just make guys start winning battles along the offensive line. You can't create separation with wide receivers who aren't necessarily creating that on their own. But it seems like there is more you could do to kind of accentuate the strengths and maybe obscure the weaknesses. And it seemed like on Saturday, for maybe the first time in Monken's career, that didn't really happen. What would you evaluate of the offensive footprint for Georgia overall after a game like this?
Yeah, I saw consistently the variety of plays that we've come to be used to. I mean, I expect almost from Coach Monken on Saturday. It was an execution issue. I mean, there's again, Ladd drop ball on a third down that hurts, and a couple overthrows by Stetson where those plays aren't, it seemed like there was an opportunity to continue a series that didn't happen. And then up front, I mean, the execution of just, it's not the plays that are called, you just have to execute out there. So, a toss sweep where both our center and our tackle are out in space and throw no-hitters. I mean, they just whiff on defenders. And a running back finally gets in space and gets the ball punched out. So that's not, to me, that's not the plays that are called because the opportunity is there. You put a hat on a hat and you execute and you catch the balls that are thrown your way and put them on the money. And it's like, these are great plays that are being called. But when you don't execute and you have a series of 3-and-outs and stalled drives, and you're going, hey, this is Missouri. We should be smoking them. You start pointing fingers everywhere, and to me, it wasn't the variety of calls. Now, I listened to you earlier about Brock Bowers, and I think you can always make a case for you can't feed that guy enough because he truly is special. And, I also recognize that there is a harness on that man's shoulder. So for a lot of the catches that he's making over his head, that harness is designed to limit your range of mobility, to limit the exposure your shoulder has to be in positions that are a little more susceptible to injury. And the fact that he doesn't slow down, and I'm thinking back to that catch against Kent State where well extended over his head and still able to go reach that ball. I also think that's why they've done a number of play designs and calls that gets him the ball just through handoffs and easy touches. But yeah, I mean, with that said, you can't get him the ball enough. He affects every defense. I'm watching some of the run game on Saturday, and he goes in. It's a split flow action. He's going to block the backside of a run, and two linebackers are committed to him, which creates space on the front end just because of the amount of respect that he demands from a defense. And that's just a generic inside run zone play. But every defense is keyed in on you can't let Brock Bowers beat you. So even when he doesn't get the ball, he's affecting the game, and that's what great players do.
So let me finish with this. Saturday, John, it's back home again. It's not a noon start. It's not an FCS opponent. It's Auburn. And Auburn's not very good, but it's still Deep South's oldest rivalry. How important of a moment is this for Georgia to kind of reboot, I guess, the emotional state this team finds itself in? And they're still a huge favorite. That's not going to change anytime soon. But when you're playing in a team that you're familiar with, when you have a little bit more favorable start time, when you have the opportunity to create a different level of energy, how important do you think being back at home in kind of familiar circumstances is for Georgia on Saturday?
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to get healthy mentally more than anything and improve, and that's what this Georgia team needs. Let's not hit the panic button. We tried to execute on the only way for those games against Kent State and Missouri to be really interesting, and that's to shoot yourself in the foot constantly in that first half. So a couple early turnovers and poor execution will give that kind of opportunity, and that's what Georgia has done 2 weeks in a row. And luckily found ways to overcome those ills that you've created. And this opportunity on Saturday is against an SEC opponent that you despise and isn't very good. So let's not start these games off with two quick turnovers and give the opposing offenses easy opportunities for big plays, and play the style of football that led to one of the best performances of the season in week 1 against Oregon, where it was consistent and well executed, and you're going, man, this Auburn opportunity is one for the momentum to shift and your confidence to continue to raise after you recognize, hey, we got to improve here. And this is a great way to go about it and show folks that you don't have to. Obviously we can get better, but you don't have to hit the panic button yet.
John, I think that's well said, and it's why we love having you on the show, because you bring such a strong perspective on all of this, both the good, the bad, and everything in between. We appreciate you sharing that with us here today, and we'll look forward to speaking to you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia again very soon as well.
Always enjoy it, B.A. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Always fun with John Stinchcomb on Auburn Week. You think back to that great speech that he gave that really propelled this team halftime of 2002. So this is a special moment, certainly when you look back on his legacy at Georgia. And we think about that kind of stuff as Georgia gets ready to play a team like Auburn, that the history of the rivalry still matters, no matter what Auburn might be, no matter what Georgia might be, and no matter how much the present tense conversation around Georgia might be getting better from where it was a week ago. That Auburn game on Saturday provides an opportunity for that. We'll obviously talk more about that as we kind of roll into the week. Speaking of opportunities, you've also got an opportunity there as well to be a part of the great experience, which is the second ever DawgNation cruise coming up this April with our friends at Royal Caribbean. And obviously, It's a great time to be on the high seas with Royal Caribbean. I'm looking forward to some great Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. After a game like Saturday, you sort of feel like you need one of those vacations a little bit. Well, eventually we're all going to get one. At least I'm going to get one. Hope you'll be able to get one with us there as well. We're hearing from so many folks who are getting signed up to be a part of this DawgNation cruise, and also so many folks who are enjoying themselves on one of those cruises going into that experience. So as I kind of call them, practice cruises, get ready for the real thing coming up in April. I've got a couple of those coming up in February there too, and there's all different kinds of ships that you can be on when it comes to Royal Caribbean. You might want one of those ships that goes on, like, say, one of the 3 or the 4-night sailings, or the Oasis class ships. Those are the larger ships that kind of go on the 7-night sailings, and there's so many different things to do on board these ships, which I think is so much fun. You've got the Broadway-style shows. You've got the entertainment options. It's, endless, seemingly an endless array of really cool shows, really cool entertainment, something for the whole family, really, on all of that. And you can experience that same thing when you take that DawgNation cruise with us coming up in April there as well. There's a great travel agent. Her name is Jessica Slater. She's been handpicked for us by Royal Caribbean to help book your Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. They believe that she'll take good care of you, and that's why they've recommended her. She's put a website together. It's called RoyalDogs.com. RoyalDogs.com. You can learn more about the second ever DawgNation cruise coming up later on this spring, and you can reach out to Jessica directly there as well. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147, and make your plans to be a part of the DawgNation cruise here right now, and also make your plans to be on any number of great Royal Caribbean cruise vacations here towards the end of 2022 or in early 2023. I think you'll be really glad you did that. We're going to get Mike Griffith live from Auburn here coming up in a couple of minutes, where the Tigers are continuing their preparations for Georgia, I guess beginning those, fresh off another loss on Saturday. Before that, though, let's kind of bounce around some of the SEC through stuff here, cruising around the SEC with Royal Caribbean. Alabama does beat Arkansas, but it was costly in the fact that Bryce Young has sustained a shoulder injury. Nick Saban saying after the game on Saturday that he thinks he's going to kind of be okay, but it's difficult to know. It's an AC joint's what it's being called, and it's difficult to know how long something like this might linger. I do think that Alabama probably feels more confident in Jalen Milroe now, the backup, than they would have a year ago. So against Texas A&M on Saturday, we'll see how much Alabama drops off without Bryce Young at quarterback, and we'll kind of sort of look into the future to see when might Alabama get Young back again, because this is like a lot of these injuries you see, kind of around this time, where it's like, okay, he could rush his way back and be a guy that helps Alabama. But when you think about the value of that shoulder to his NFL future, like, how risky does Bryce Young want to be in all this? And I'm not suggesting I know. I'm saying it's a question that's got to be asked here of, okay, how quickly can you get back, but how quickly do you want to get back when you're dealing with an injury like this? I think that's a real consideration for Young right now. And while he's not playing, what Alabama does get from Jalen Milroe, I think, is going to be a source of curiosity. As I said before, I think he's certainly more ready to play now than he would have been this time a year ago, and we'll see what he looks like against Texas A&M on Saturday. I think the other thing that's kind of emerged after Saturday's game is Alabama's one true playmaker right now is Jahmyr Gibbs. This is not an Alabama wide receiver core the way we've come to expect it to be. It's just not. I don't believe that's ever going to change on this team this year. So for their game-breaking plays, especially with Young not out there, they're just going to have to lean heavily on Gibbs. And that's one of those things I think you're going to see kind of emerge more coming up this Saturday against Texas A&M, is that Alabama just needs as much as they can get from the Georgia Tech running back transfer. Speaking of Georgia's opponent on Saturday, that is Auburn. They had a lead for a long time against LSU on Saturday, could not sustain that. LSU ends up getting the win. I told you I was going to be skeptical to buy into LSU here in this spot, and I think I've certainly been proven correct on that. I took the team total under for LSU here just simply because I didn't think they were capable of pulling away and making it look easy against Auburn. Ultimately, that's what happened there in that game. Now, I don't know that that helps Auburn's cause all that much, even though they, for the most part, played kind of okay in the game. It seems like Brian Harson's status is just as, it's not even really up in the air. It's just as, seemingly almost done as it possibly can be. If Georgia were to beat Auburn on Saturday, I do believe that Harsin will be fired immediately after the game. He's just on his way to having his Auburn career concluded. The game on Saturday, despite the fact that Auburn actually probably showed a little bit more fight than some people thought they would, doesn't do much here to save Harsin. This is a coach in the final days of his tenure as Auburn with the Auburn job, and a big Georgia win on Saturday could certainly seal his fate. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you start thinking about Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, who I got to give credit here. I think that Kiffin's doing a pretty good job at Ole Miss right now. This is a hard-fought game against Kentucky on Saturday. The Ole Miss defense is playing pretty well. He had the great zinger at the end of the game, kind of making fun of all the hype with Will Levis. I'll never understand how that's been so out in front. A couple turnovers on Saturday. He's had interceptions throughout his entire career. Not capable of winning a game like this on the road. And I'd say good for Kiffin for taking the jab at how silly it is that Levis has been promoted as much as he has. Now, Kentucky did cover the spread here in this game on Saturday, so I guess gamblers will give him some credit for that. But this is just not the kind of game that Kentucky's capable of winning. And a team like Ole Miss is capable of standing up in its home stadium a little bit more, and I think they're kind of proving that right now they're a bit of a tough out here in the SEC West, and probably better coming off a successful season a year ago, better right now than I probably expected them to be. I think you give Lane Kiffin some credit for that. Now, you'll also notice that last year when there was a huge, aggressive coaching carousel spinning around, there was never really a moment when Lane Kiffin's name was seriously mentioned for any other job. You kind of wonder, does that change here this year with more and more coaching jobs coming available? The Auburn job seemed to come available. Does a guy like Kiffin emerge as a real candidate here in a way that he didn't last season? I think that's probably worth paying attention to, because eventually he's obviously going to want to leave Ole Miss if he can. But last year he probably couldn't. Nobody really took him all that seriously as a candidate. Maybe that's starting to change a little bit right now, because they clearly looked like an SEC team standing up at home against Kentucky. Speaking of teams playing well at home, that's what Mississippi State did on Saturday. And it's a real issue for A&M right now. It just is. And I think it's fair to ask all kinds of questions about Jimbo Fisher. It's just not happening right now. It's just not. And, this is the kind of moment coming off a couple of big wins. Now, we took Mississippi State here on this show. I think that was, fairly easy to see. They were the right side going into this game. But nonetheless, to not really be competitive against Mississippi State when you found a way to eke out a couple of wins, against Arkansas last week, against Miami before that, and leaving all of that squandered on the road to College Station. Fair to say whatever you want about Jimbo Fisher right now. It's just not getting done. Just not happening there for that bunch there in College Station. And they've got Alabama on Saturday. It could get even uglier there. And you start to wonder, how much is this starting to bruise the reputation of Jimbo with his own fans? Media has kind of had it out for Jimbo for a while, and some of those folks look right now. Texas A&M fans have actually had a little bit more patience and a little bit more of a longer leash on Jimbo than you might think. But does that start to change right now? Some of those boosters who have allegedly spent so big on NIL, how much do they regret that? Buyer's remorse, maybe? At least worth considering. One more thing here. You saw the polls come out yesterday. Georgia obviously lost its number one ranking, probably deservingly so. Georgia didn't play like a number one team there in Columbia, Missouri, and so you got to give it to somebody. So you give it back to Alabama here right now, and we'll see if this number one ranking becomes a little bit of a hot potato type thing. Alabama had it, gave it away. Georgia's had it, now it's giving it away. I think we're still very unsettled at the top of college football, but some of the stuff with the ranking starts to make a little more sense here as we move to kind of the halfway point of the regular season coming up after this upcoming Saturday. So we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. And by the way, speaking of the Plains, that is where Georgia's opponent resides, and that's also where Mike Griffith joins us here too. I guess he's going to pay taxes in Auburn. It seems like he's been there for a little while now. Got the sweater on today, looking very professional, but maybe not quite such a good look for Brian Harsin right now. Mike, you're there. Auburn coming into Athens on Saturday. I think there's a very good chance, and I'm just sort of basing this on my kind of read of the situation. This is not reporting, obviously. But my read on the situation is there's a very good chance that Harsin's last game as Auburn coach could come Saturday against Georgia. Do you get the sense that might be true as well?
Well, you never know. They've got Ole Miss after that and then a bye week. And some people are pointing towards the bye week. Some people have said, well, if you were going to fire him, why wouldn't you have fired him after a bad, Missouri win or the loss to LSU? They were up 17-0. So really hard to know what's going through Auburn's mind. Part of the issue here, Brandon, is if you fire him, who do you have on your staff that's interim capable? I mean, sometimes you want a guy gone, but you got to have somebody else ready to fill that role in an interim capacity. My bet would be Zach Etheridge would be the guy. But again, we're not that far yet, and we're not sure when Coach Harsin will be fired. We've seen a lot of other firings, certainly the Paul Chryst firing up there at Wisconsin caught some people off guard. 3-2. I mean, there's a guy that was 13-1 and went in an Orange Bowl just a few years ago. So programs are becoming less patient. It seems that these buyouts are not as much of an impediment for firing coaches as maybe we once thought that they would be. So real hard to tell what's going to happen here on the Plains as far as Coach Harson's immediate future.
What do you think about Georgia on Saturday, Mike? What went wrong? And I mean, ultimately got the win against Missouri, of course, but obviously it was not a day to celebrate because Georgia didn't play particularly well there. What was your overall takeaway from what you saw?
I think Missouri schemed them up. I mean, we saw what Georgia could do with an entire offseason to plan for a team. They looked incredibly efficient against Oregon, and they looked very good against South Carolina as well, 49-3 and 48-6. But there were struggles against Samford. There were struggles against Kent State. Kirby Smart has told us all along, this team is not last year's team. There aren't 15 NFL draft picks, guys that are going to get picked in the upcoming draft, on this team. The offensive line has not performed up to par. Stetson Bennett has been somewhat inconsistent. Stetson said he didn't play well on Saturday. Kirby said that he takes some of the responsibility. He puts some of that responsibility on Todd Monken. Are they asking Stetson Bennett to do too much? Does he need to be more of a game manager rather than trying to do too much on the road in a hostile environment? It's not for everybody. There's only so many of those quarterbacks to go around. So I think it's a combination of poor offensive line play. I think that Stetson didn't have his best game. He didn't have his best receivers, I might add. A.D. Mitchell was not out there. Ladd McConkey is still slowed by turf toe, not the same guy. So that combination of things, along with the defense giving up some really big plays, uncharacteristically getting beat on chunk plays, improper fits. Yes, Malachi Starks made a touchdown-saving tackle, but maybe he doesn't need to if that play is fit properly. The guy's not rumbling 40, 50 yards downfield. So these are the things that Kirby Smart knew could be exposed if they ran into the wrong opponent in the wrong environment, and they ran into the wrong opponent in the wrong environment. Missouri was the better prepared team. Missouri was the hungrier team, and Missouri was the more physical team until about early in the fourth quarter when Kenny McIntosh had the hit of the game and ran over that Missouri defender. I can still hear that hit echoing in my mind, and then the next play goes 22 yards, and that drive proved absolutely pivotal.
We haven't talked a ton about the defensive side today, but we're going to do that obviously more throughout the week. And one of the things I'm left to conclude after Saturday's game is, for the foreseeable future, they're not going to have Jalen Carter available to them. And I think you're left to really try to wonder, well, who are your big defensive playmakers right now? Now, I thought the defense, gave Georgia a chance to win this game on Saturday, so it's not all certainly a negative story for the Georgia defense, but there are also not a lot of huge, impactful plays from this defense on Saturday either. And when fully healthy, Carter's the guy most capable of providing those. But I'm not quite so sure how long into the future it's going to be before Carter is back fully healthy again. And that creates, I would say, an additional challenge to this Georgia defense. Maybe not against Auburn on Saturday because Auburn's not very good, but certainly in games beyond that, the absence of Carter is going to be really felt, Mike.
I don't know if we're going to see a completely healthy Jalen Carter again at Georgia. He's been playing with a foot injury, an ankle injury. Now we're talking about an MCL. Do you continue to play this guy limited snaps and slow down the healing window, or do you just pull him off the field, BA, and try to get him back, as close to 100% as possible for the Florida game? As for Auburn not being very good, I'll just tell you, from my seat, there's 6:45 left in the first half on Saturday. They're beating LSU 17-0. They've got 240 yards. LSU's got about 80. And Auburn has the ball at their own 35. That's looking pretty good against a pretty decent LSU team. So I guess I would caution you before saying they're not that good. I didn't think Missouri was that good either. I don't know how good you have to be to beat Georgia's offensive line or to cover a receiving corps that's banged up right now. I think Auburn is dangerous. I don't think they're going to beat Georgia. But do I think that they could make this game ugly if Georgia and particularly if the passing game doesn't improve? They could because the Georgia offense right now does not look as efficient as it did in the opener. It just doesn't. And I think some of that has to do with A.D. Mitchell being out and McConkey being slowed. But back to Auburn, I'm not ready to throw shovels of dirt on this team. Here's an amazing statistic for you about Auburn, and it's, for better or for worse. In Auburn's last 5 SEC losses, and this includes Alabama last year and Mississippi State last year, their last 5 SEC conference losses, they've led by double digits at some point in all those games. Now, that means they can't finish. It means other teams are adjusting. But it also means that Auburn's coming in with good enough game plans to stake their team out to a lead. This will only be the 3rd career start for Robbie Ashford. It was only his 2nd start against LSU. It was markedly better than he was against Missouri. He'll need to make a lot more improvement for them to have any shot against Georgia. But what I'm saying is is Auburn is not Vanderbilt talent. This is a program that has had success against all the SEC teams they played, even in the losses. They just haven't been able to sustain into the second half of these games.
All right, Mike, we'll look forward to your coverage of Georgia's opponent there today, and obviously look forward to having you back here on the show again very soon there as well, and I guess seeing you in Athens on Saturday too. So thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today, and be safe coming back.
Thanks, BA.
All right, good stuff there from Mike Griffith. And, yeah, we kind of told you going into the Auburn-LSU game is, to me, that was a referendum on LSU. And I told you going into last week, LSU was no team to be thinking they had a chance to go on the road and beat anybody easily right now, because LSU is kind of a sloppy operation. And that was true against Florida State on that first weekend of the season. It was proven true again, whatsoever there as well. But Auburn's going to pile up losses. I mean, that's just all there is to it. They're one of the 2 or 3 worst teams in the entire league. So, but as Mike said, so is Missouri, and Georgia didn't play very well against them on Saturday. So it's not necessarily a indication of how Georgia's going to play just because it's against an overmatched opponent. We've seen Georgia keep overmatched opponents in the game longer thus far this season than it should. And that's clearly one of the things you have to think about moving into Saturday, and we'll get more into the Auburn game throughout the week, is that we've now seen 5 games from Georgia, and in 3 of those games, more often than otherwise, than they've actually played sort of, less than great, more often than they've done the opposite thus far this year, and obviously a chance to correct some of that on Saturday against Auburn. Let me also do this here for a moment. I was going to do more of this, but Mike wanted to pop on from Auburn, so we wanted to give him a chance to do that. So tomorrow on the radio, I'm going to be with our friends at 92.9 The Game in Atlanta. They do a great job. Randy McMichael is one of the hosts there, and Randy from his time as a Georgia tight end. And I want to ask Randy about this tomorrow, because you've heard me say a lot today, hey, Georgia got to get the ball to Brock Bowers more. I think that's a self-evident point. I don't think I have any responsibility to explain why that's true, because Bowers has been Georgia's best offensive player now since he's been a part of the program. But in addition to that, one of the things I'm also hearing a lot of you saying there as well is, hey, Georgia's got to get the ball to Darnell Washington more there as well. And there's certainly a lot of questions for me about that. Like, why does it seem like the cap on Washington's touches, his targets, his catches, is somewhere in that sort of 2 to 3 neighborhood? Like, why couldn't Darnell Washington have the kind of like 5-catch day that Brock Bowers had on Saturday? And how much better would the Georgia offense be if you did get Washington more involved like that? I want to ask Randy that tomorrow. Now, normally when I'm the guest, I'm the one that's being asked the questions to. But I actually want to ask Randy about that when I'm on 92.9 The Game in Atlanta tomorrow afternoon, because I think Randy might have an interesting perspective on this. And whatever he says, I'm going to bring it back to you and kind of share what he does say on that particular topic, because, I mean, after Saturday, especially late in the game, he goes up, gets that football, takes a huge shot, and just kind of shakes it off. I mean, he's just such an imposing physical presence out there. Is this a guy that Georgia should be throwing it more to? I sort of have my suspicions as to maybe why that hasn't happened more. I'm not sure that I'm correct on that, so I want to save my opinion until after I hear from an expert. I believe that Randy is, so we'll share that with you on the show here this week. But as far as the impact that Washington didn't make on Saturday's game, and what he showed there late in the game and how impressive that was, Kirby Smart certainly agreed with that as an idea going back Saturday night. Here's one more from Kirby before we're done today.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, a lot of credit goes to Darnell, and Stetson showing confidence in him to throw the ball in his area code, and he goes and gets it. And, people don't give this guy enough credit, but Darnell was one of the leaders in that locker room that was, said, I want to run the ball, get behind me, let me move people. There's a play out there where he absolutely, on Brock Bowers' screen I thought it was a touchdown, but it got to like the 1 foot line, that Darnell just destroys a guy. There's no value you can put on that.
So nobody questions that Darnell's a really good player. Nobody questions, as Kirby Smart says, that he is a valuable asset to this offense, that when he's out there, opening holes as a blocker, when he's creating opportunities for the running game, that's a huge value to UGA. And yet there are a lot of fans who would say, in addition to that, we also want to see him get rewarded with big catches, with opportunities to be a big part of the offense. And when he makes catches, things seem to be going really well for Georgia. And as I told you before, I think statistically he's actually having, a pretty good year. I think he has a chance to have an even better year, but he's had a, pretty good year thus far. But like, why isn't it more than it already is when seemingly when he catches the football, good things happen for Georgia? As I said, I'm going to ask a guy who knows more about this than I do tomorrow, and we'll come back and at some point in time this week kind of share what a former Georgia tight end has to say about all of that. Now, this has also been kind of one of those days in which probably more negative than positive. Ultimately, we're still really happy about the state of Georgia football. I mean, Georgia is still undefeated, still reigning national champs, and still, as you've been hearing us say for a while, go for 2 in 22. All of that is still very much a strong possibility for Georgia, and this is simply just one of the steps in the direction for all of that here this year. So don't lose sight of that, and don't, forget about the fact that can still be really, really true for Georgia. And maybe as a way of kind of making it feel better after a day in which you've had to kind of chop up some things that are not great for the Dogs, let's see if we can end today on kind of a happy, good note, because a lot of Georgia fans who are watching this team each and every Saturday are also Braves fans there as well. And while it was kind of only an okay day for the Dogs this weekend, it was an unbelievable weekend for the Atlanta Braves. Atlanta Braves got the sweep against the New York Mets. Now, a lot of you know, and this actually kind of ties back into the Georgia-Missouri game, a lot of you know that very popular song for the Mets, their closer uses. It's that Timmy Trumpet song, the Narco song. And this is also the same song that Missouri was playing on third down over and over again on Saturday. So there's a little bit of a tie back in on this. Well, I saw this morning. It comes from a Twitter account called Fake Mark Bowman. Mark's a guy that covers the Braves. This is not Mark Bowman. This is somebody doing one of those sort of, fake alternate ego type accounts. But it was basically taking, I guess Timmy Trumpets showed up to play the song at Citi Field, but instead of that song, it was an entirely different sort of trumpet song to honor the New York Mets after the weekend. So what do you say, especially since we all heard this over and over again this weekend with Missouri on third down on Saturday night? How about this ode to the New York Mets? If you're on video, this is going to make more sense. If you're listening, this is taking place at Citi Field, and it's supposed to be the Narco song, but that's not that. This is our golden shoe for today. All right, that's probably good. I think you kind of get where all this is going. I think that's really funny. Fake Mark Bowman did this. I thought this was hilarious. Really funny as a way to say goodbye to the New York Mets, who at one point in time had, about an 80% chance of winning the division, but after getting swept by the Braves, have now just a 2% chance of winning the division. The Braves still got some work to do. They got to win one more game in Miami here this week. They'll try to do that tonight. But so fun to watch those miserable Mets left to be miserable here once again. And for me, it could not happen to a better bunch than it's just perfect, right? We hate the lousy, stinking Gators. They're orange and blue. We hate the New York Mets, who just so happen to wear that same orange and blue color scheme. Must be something about that. So we'll make that from Fake Mark Bowman our golden shoe for here today. And by the way, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, don't forget, we got the Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt here right now. I showed this to you a little bit last week. I'll remind you again as we get ready for the cocktail party coming up in just a few days, a couple of weeks away here. You can show where your heart lies. We always believe that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. One of the best ways to show that is with the Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt. You can get this at the DawgNation store. Really good stuff. Go to the top of the page at DawgNation.com, click the link, and you can get in there and get one of those right now. And remind folks that the Lousy Stinking Gators are truly lousy and stinking, and that never changes. Our Eddie the Blind Squirrel t-shirt is in there as well. All of that right there when you click the link at the top of the page at DawgNation.com inside the DawgNation store. We'll also remind you, speaking of the Lousy Stinking Gators, much like the New York Mets, long title drought, about 5,016 days. Now, the Mets title drought's even longer. That's 1986. But for Florida, it's getting on up there, too, 5,016 days. And bad news coming from them 26 days from now as well, when Georgia beats them again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. Still plenty to feel good about if you're a Dog fan, especially when you can close the show by making fun of those lousy, stinking Gators. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on that, including getting your heating system up and running for the cold weather season that it's on its way. R.S. Andrews, for more on that at rsandrews.com. You can get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Somebody may have told you need to replace it, and R.S. Andrews may be able to tell you how you can get another season or two out of that unit. So find them online, rsandrews.com, for a lot more on that. Okay, so we're going to roll through here and get a bunch of comments. I'm going to start on Facebook today because I don't think I've started on Facebook in a little while here. So I want to start on Facebook, and we'll let people talk about what they want to, and we'll just kind of take it where it goes here today. Probably won't go crazy long because I'm still a little punchy from the weekend from traveling, but we'll take it. And obviously, Facebook takes 6 hours to open now. There you go. Now we're in here. All right, on Facebook, your comments here. Caleb Janney says it's not time for quarterback controversy. Let me read this from Caleb. Dogs need to focus and dominate both sides of the line. Better offensive line play will help offense be more explosive in the pass game and run game. Yeah, I mean, it's just not even a consideration. It's just not a consideration. Stetson Bennett is this team's quarterback, and that's just all there is. And I think even on Saturday, in a day he wasn't great, he still did more good than bad. And if anything, I think that Georgia could actually be a little bit more aggressive in how they use him. Let him run the ball more. It's like originally we were told that, hey, the thing that made him valuable was his athleticism, his ability to keep plays alive with his legs. Well, utilize that. In a time in which you're not getting great push from your offensive line, when something seems to be not quite right with your running game all the way across the board, then utilize Stetson Bennett there in that category. But it's just not a consideration. Carson Beck's just not close to Bennett in terms of his ability to take over this team and lead this offense. It's just not even a consideration. It is literally not even on the radar at a place like Georgia. Let's see what else. Lee Hayes on that one field goal sneak. Now, they did run him on that. He looked pretty good doing that for sure. He did look pretty good doing that. Johnny Robinson also talking about the Falcons getting a win yesterday. I guess they're, first place in the NFC South right now? Jamie Huff mentioned that we really haven't seen Micah Morris yet. That's another offensive lineman that hasn't been heard from too much. Curtis Witt mentioning not a great day for Keely Ringo, and it's just a fact. And we love Keely, and Keely obviously lives in dog lore forever, and he's still a hugely important part of this team right now. But he did not have a great game on Saturday. He didn't. And to me, look, when all you've got is to sort of line up and take those deep shots, you're going to hit on a few of those, right? And even a guy like Ringo is going to give some of those up. We see, elite cornerbacks in the NFL. They get beat sometimes. It's just what happens. But when that does happen, it's all the more of a reminder that Georgia's got to create more negative plays defensively. I'm sorry for being such a broken record on this, but Georgia is just not going to line up and stop people on a per-play basis like it's done in the past. I know it did it for the most part against Oregon, but actually that game is also kind of proof of this, that Oregon didn't score very many points, only had the 3 points, but actually on a per-play basis, they were actually moving the football pretty well, especially inside, from kind of 20 to 20. They were moving it okay. This is a Georgia team that's going to have to do a little bit more of what Missouri did, which is, hey, you make up for what you give up by what you create, and you can create those negative plays, tackles for loss, sacks. They've just got to have more. And I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you draw it up, but you've got to have more of that. Like the one thing I've been saying for a little bit here is that this is something I believe that Dan Lanning was particularly good at, not just last year, but in 2020 as well. Georgia became a much more aggressive pass rushing team. And I do think they've got to demonstrate in the post-Dan Lanning era they can still create those opportunities for the defensive playmakers. I do. Let's see what else. Jacob O'Neal calling for the Braves to clinch tonight. I think it could happen for sure. Barry Davis says, well, injuries hurt the Dogs this week. I don't think against Auburn. I just don't think Auburn's any good. But I still think this is an important game for Georgia, even if I don't think Auburn's any good at all. I don't think Auburn is any good at all. But yeah, I mean, injuries are hurting Georgia right now. Like A.D. Mitchell being out is apparently really harming Georgia's wide receivers. Because the rest of the group's just not quite playing at that same level that I guess Mitchell is. Now, I thought that Blaylock had a couple nice catches, and so maybe eventually he becomes a little bit more a part of this story. But, I mean, Saturday was a lot of man coverage against Georgia's wide receivers, And it was just blanket across the board. And I guess with Mitchell out there, that's less likely to happen, but that's clearly an injury that's kind of harming you a little bit. And Carter not being out there, I mean, that's a guy that has a chance to be a game wrecker for you on defense, and right now you don't have him. So, yeah, a little bit of an issue there right now. Back on YouTube, Spencer Clark says Mitchell's not a true number one wide receiver. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but I think he's probably Georgia's best when he's healthy, though. Antoine Sampson shouting out, big day for George Pickens, the NFL, and I love to see that. Cody Ledoux says, I don't want to hear the excuses about AD. Y'all said Bama made excuses when Mechie and Jameson Williams were out. Cody, I saw you say in this comment section earlier, you're not anywhere near as clever as you think you are. First of all, what we're talking about right now is how Georgia could be better than they currently are. That's different from Alabama fans, like a bunch of dorks saying their loss didn't count because Mechie and Williams didn't play. It's completely different scenarios, Cody. And I know you're smart enough to know the difference there on that. What we're talking about right now is how Georgia can get better from where it was on Saturday, and Mitchell returning would provide that. What we're not talking about is, making some sort of excuse for why Georgia lost, because guess what? Georgia didn't lose. And I know that Alabama fans somehow feel emboldened because Georgia won this game close on Saturday. Well, guess what? Last year, Alabama played even worse than this and losing to Texas A&M. So this idea that what Georgia did on Saturday somehow proves something positive about Alabama, Cody, you're just deluding yourself. And listen, I actually like your comments. I think you come in here and I think you stir it up pretty well, and I think half the people that argue with you kind of enjoy arguing with you. I really do. So I got no beef with you, but you are nowhere near as clever as you think you are on this particular topic. Let's see what Wade Wofford says. Just fix Georgia's offensive line and we are good. And Wade, you may be right on that obviously better play from the offensive line would make a lot of things feel different. And I did take it as a little bit of a positive from John Stinchcomb a moment ago that he thought that was the case. Because if you think about it, what is offensive line? That's about physical dominance, right? It's like, if somebody lines up and whips you one day, I sort of expect them to line up and whip you the next day too. But John said, no, there's a lot of different things that you might be able to do to reassert an edge for yourself over the course of the season. So I took that as a little bit of a positive. I did. Let's see what else. Some of y'all are funny. Frank Patterson checks in to say, my only problems with Monken are he refuses to run the toss sweep, and he refuses to throw the ball to Big O in the red zone. It seems he calls plays to impress recruits and not beat opponents. So I think that Monken overall is an outstanding offensive coordinator. I don't really think he had a great day on Saturday. I think he's an outstanding offensive coordinator. So let's kind of run through what you said. Would I like to see toss sweep? I think I would, but I also think toss sweep's a play where you need dominant blocking, right? I mean, that's different than, like, to me, quarterback, I should say, quick pass to the running back where I think you can just kind of do that quick. But if you're not getting dominant blocking, on Saturday, as John said, we've been kind of on the guards so far this season. But on Saturday, it wasn't just guards who had their issue. In fact, there may have been a couple of moments when the guards actually played okay. But I don't know that Georgia's tackles had a very good day on Saturday either. And I'm not an X's and O's guy. I'm not going to break down the film. That's not what I do. But just sitting there watching it, it certainly seemed like there were some moments, and John Stinchcomb kind of pointed this out himself, where I don't think Georgia's tackles had a great day on Saturday. And so if you're not setting that edge, if you're not really dominant with your blocking, I don't know that you're running toss sweep very effectively. So that may be, the issue on that. As far as the Darnell Washington thing goes, here's what I suspect is true. And I'm going to ask Randy McMichael about this tomorrow. I suspect the reason they don't throw to Darnell more is because Darnell's not fast enough to create separation. And it's scary to throw the ball to a guy that's being blanketed in coverage. Even though Darnell shows an ability to kind of go up and moss guys and high point the football and just use his brute physicality, I think it's hard in the heat of the moment to throw the ball to a guy that has a defender blanketing him. And in almost every situation, even when Darnell gets catches, he is being blanketed by defenders because he's not going to run past people. He's a great athlete for a big man. He is not running past people. He's just not. And I think that may be why they don't throw the ball to him more. Now, should they try to force it to him because he's proving that he can, get the football? Maybe they should. It's one of the reasons I suspect, if you look at every tight end in the NFL that puts up huge numbers, almost all of them putting up way more numbers in the NFL than they did in college. Most NFL quarterbacks are just a little bit more comfortable making the sort of tight window throw that, that tight ends are going to kind of thrive in on Sundays. And there's also a chance I'm wrong about this. As I told you before, I was trying to kind of hold back on my opinion, but I thought a lot yesterday about, okay, so why doesn't Darnell get like 5 and 6 catches a game as opposed to the sort of like 2 and 3 catches that he commonly gets? And if I had to guess, that's what I really think that it is that, a guy like Bowers just looks more open because he is more open. He's just faster. And a guy like Washington really shows an ability to catch the football, but he is not just going to run past people. That you've got to really trust your ability to kind of put it right on the button with him, because that defender, even if it's a smaller guy, even if it's a guy that can't match Washington's physicality, is just going to be on him more because Washington's just not going to run away from people. If I had to guess, that's what I'm thinking. Let's see what else. WWS says Darnell is a major mismatch 100% of the time. He is a tight end, not a wide receiver. No one is expecting him to blow past people. But the point is, if you want to know why it's not 5 catches, why it's 2 or 3 catches, that's what I believe that it's about. And maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. I'm talking about my evaluation. Maybe that's not a good reason not to throw it to him, even if it is true. But I'm just trying to figure out like what is going on there on that. And that's what I believe that probably is, if I had to guess. Cliff Payne says Darnell needs more targets in the red zone. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think when you look at a team right now that after Saturday you'd be left to say has a shortage of playmakers, I think that Darnell is one of those guys that you really have the inclination that he probably is one. And so you probably do need to force it in there a little bit more, especially down in the red zone. And as we said, like the issue with the red zone is it just takes a more accurate throw to become a red zone touchdown, because you've got less space to work with, more defenders in that space, and you've just got to make a more accurate throw down there. But that's what the game requires. And so if you want to turn field goals into touchdowns, Washington would seem to be one of those guys you could potentially do that with. There are a lot of guys that we sort of thought might be playmakers, and in some cases, I'm not quite so sure they're proving to be them. Just to be completely honest, that some of the guys that we kind of hoped, oh, this guy's a playmaker, he's ready to show it. Maybe not in some cases. But in Washington's case, we certainly haven't seen any indication that he's not a playmaker. And it's just a matter of, okay, well, what's it going to do to get the ball to him more? You may just have to try to force it to him in moments when he doesn't necessarily look open, but his sheer physicality gives him a chance to win the football in a way that other players might not. So, man, that to me is what it is. I also think right now Georgia's missing Eric Gilbert. I do. And we've been down this road before. Gilbert's trying his best to work his way back towards football. Georgia's trying to help him with all of that. Gilbert was present but not dressed against Missouri on Saturday. That lets you know that Georgia views him as a valuable presence, but he's just not capable of providing that to Georgia right now. But the best version of Eric Gilbert's helping this offense right now. It really would be. And right now, Georgia just doesn't have it. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a moment. Bobby says we need to open down the field threat. I hated to see that little underpitch at the line of scrimmage. Thought we got away from that. Right now, Georgia does not have a wide receiver unless Arian Smith is healthy. And right now, he's only partially healthy. He did play on Saturday. Georgia does not have a wide receiver to create that big strike deep down the field. They just don't have it. Maybe when Mitchell's back, he becomes more of that. He certainly was in the national championship game last year. But this big 50, 60-yard strike down the field, Mitchell and Arian Smith, those are your guys that might be able to provide that. But I don't think the guys that Georgia had in the game on Saturday right now are able to give that to you. West GA Dog fan says, this is not Georgia, but I found this interesting. Jimbo Fisher, who would be owed more than He says $95 million if he was fired without cause. I know he won't be fired anytime soon. Has the same record as Kevin Sumlin through their first 53 games. That is interesting. And here's what I'll tell you. There's a little bit of chatter coming out of College Station that there are some unhappy boosters right now. Now, I don't think they could do anything with Jimbo if they wanted to, but it just goes to show you how quickly things can change. And it goes to show you that, like, buzz is not the same thing as performance. You can buy buzz, but you can't buy wins. Like, the Mets are the same way. Like, how much money have the Mets spent on their organization? But you can't buy some guts. Like, it takes guts to go win in Atlanta on the final weekend of the season. The Mets just don't have any. The Mets just don't have any guts. They just don't. They're petrified. They just don't have the you-know-what to come in and win a game like that. Money can't buy that stuff. You can buy players. You can buy all kinds of things, but you can't buy the stones to go out and win a game when you really need it. And A&M's kind of running the same deal right here. You can spend big and steal a coach from Florida State. You can spend big and steal a recruiting class. You can spend big and do all kinds of stuff on the periphery of a program. And I say this as somebody who legitimately has thought that Jimbo Fisher's a pretty good coach, and I'll totally acknowledge that if this continues the way it's going right now, a lot of y'all will have a lot of points against me because we've clearly argued this in this portion of the show for quite some time. So I totally acknowledge that I am on the verge of taking a pretty big L here. And if that happens, I'm not going to run away from that. You don't have to worry about me doing that. I won't run away from this. But if the trajectory continues that we're on now, I think it reaffirms something we all know to be true, is that you can buy a lot of stuff on the periphery of college football. Facilities, recruiting classes, coaches, things like that. But what happens between the white lines cannot be bought. You just can't. What happens between the white lines is about more than your recruiting ranking or your NIL deal or whatever else. It's about just having the guts to go out there and get it done. And Texas A&M just can't. And for years, they just haven't been able to. They don't win games. They've recruited, even before the number one class, they've recruited pretty well. They've got a huge following. They're big business. They just don't win games. They just don't do it. Lee B says Dansby Swanson said it best, a competitive mentality beats talent. It just does. There is just no substitute for not even the desire to compete, the hunger to compete, the insatiable appetite for competition. And if anybody can say they have that right now, Dansby does. He hit a home run in all 3 games. He hit a home run against Scherzer. He hit a home run against DeGrom. Now he can say, well, he's playing for his contract. Even better. Good for him. He ought to get paid. Lee B says, I was also happy for the Falcons as well. Yeah, honestly, like, reconsidering the Falcons here a little bit after getting back to 2-2, reconsidering that a little bit, for sure. Brian Jones, don't forget Alabama can buy the refs, though, which is very funny. Very funny. All right. Brandon Griffin says 3 and 4 stars playing together and bought in will beat a team of 5 stars with bad coaching and playing selfish every time. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually kind of fascinated by this part of this because, trust me, I know a lot of people who do recruiting rankings, or at least have done them over the years. Like, the one thing I'm sure they would all say is, boy, I wish we could quantify that competitive thing. I wish we could quantify that because NFL GMs get burned on this all the time. It's like you lean into what you can measure. You know how big a guy is. You know how fast he is. Those are things that can be measured. But that only tells you part of the story. It's one of the reasons why there's all this like sort of flailing around in the dark of like, ooh, let's do a Wonderlic test. Or let's do all this kind of stuff. Let's find something we can measure because the thing that matters most of anything is immeasurable. I mean, think about Michael Jordan, the true GOAT. And I'll hear no slander to the contrary. Like, there's a lot of things about Jordan measurably that would not make him the best of all time. He's not the biggest. He was only 6'6". He's not necessarily the fastest. Other guys are probably faster than he was. He wasn't number 1 overall pick in the draft when he came out. Measurably, there were reasons to maybe think someone else might be better. But whatever Jordan had, that intangible quality just made him so much better. I would say Jerry Rice is probably the same way. I would say that Jerry Rice is probably the best NFL player of all time, I believe. And Rice, by today's wide receiver standards, is actually slow. And yet on the field, you couldn't tackle him. Like, there's just something about that competitive fire that that you can't measure it, but it probably matters more than anything does. DT also pointing out Matt Olson showed up big, and you better believe on that. Randy Hall says, who was your player of the game on Saturday? It's funny you should ask this, Randy, because we were talking about this a lot in the press box. We actually do a player of the game. And so we're trying to figure out who to give it to. And for a while, there wasn't much of a candidate. I'm not trying to be overly negative here. I'm just being honest. There was a moment in this game in which, like, trying to find a player of the game, which we're contractually obligated to do, was no easy feat. Ultimately, I think Dajon Edwards became a worthy winner of that, because even in a day when we're left to kind of ask some tough questions with the Georgia rushing attack, Dajon stepped up big. And I loved it for Dajon, because for a long time, Dajon's been getting fourth quarter carries in garbage time, in blowout games, and he's been kind of the human victory cigar. On Saturday, he was the difference between winning and losing. And I'm so happy for him on that. I really am. I'm so happy for him on that, for sure. And by the way, one day in the future, I think a guy like Branson Robbins is going to be getting a chance to do that same thing there too. I know Branson is a little bit like where Dajon was, where you feel like you're good enough to play, but right now you're not playing as much as you want to. I know that Branson probably feels that way. His day is coming. His day is coming. He just needs to hang in there. His day is coming. Matt Rugavino was talking about Dajon running tough. Loved his yards after carry. Yeah, Dajon, he's a tough dude. He's a tough dude. He's a tough dude. All right, let me do some final comments here. Back on YouTube and then back on Facebook. Robert Moore says Jack Podlesny was my player of the game. His kicks were clutch. Yeah, I mean, he had some good ones, and he had to go toe for toe with that Missouri kicker who had missed the field goal against Auburn. That dude was like. He was like the ghost of Kevin Butler. Of course, Kevin's still with us. Like he was just hitting everything, 55, 53, and he was making me nervous. That was honestly, it wasn't until he started doing that Superman act that I started, actually thinking Georgia might lose. It's like when the Missouri kicker's going to start kicking from midfield. Yeah, there he is. What they call him, the thicker kicker. When he starts making all those 50-plus yard field goals, it's like, oh my gosh. This ain't good. Jay Shimes says, well, I signed his wanted poster for the A&M offense. Jay, that's very funny. And listen, right now you're winning, Jay. You're winning. You were on Kiffin. I was on Jimbo. And right now your pick looks better than mine. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. Justin Wolf says he's 300 pounds. I mean, honestly, good for him. It's like I'd give anything if I could be 300 pounds and like actually do my, my job. I'd love nothing more than just a. Spencer Clark says it looks like Sebastian Janikowski. A little bit, he does. He does a little bit. Kirby's visor. Yeah, Jay. I mean, listen, Jay called his shot on Kiffin, and it looks pretty smart right now. It does. It looks pretty smart. All right, let's go back over to Facebook, and then we got to go. All right, on Facebook. Terrence Daly on the subject of Kendall Milton. Yeah, I know that fumble's going to really stick with him. And listen, I think that Kendall Milton's still a big part of this offense. I do. And there's obviously a chance that by the end of the season that some of this does get better. I mean, clearly you can't abandon the run. You can kind of lean on some other things. I told you before, I want to see Stetson running it more. I want to see him throwing to McIntosh more like they did against Oregon. I want to see him throwing it to Brock Bowers more in every single game. You can't have these wild swings when she does touch it. When he doesn't touch it, you can't have that. But you can't abandon the run. So they're going to have to lean on Milton. They're going to have to lean on McIntosh. And certainly Dajon Edwards there as well. So you had the fumble by Milton. Otherwise, the numbers don't look too bad. Some moments for McIntosh, 2, I guess. They're going to, they can't give up on that because you got to run the ball in the SEC. Keith Bradshaw gives you go Dogs. Appreciate that. Jamie Huff says time to play Bear and Marvin Jones and Miller and Sherman. I think that Bear Alexander, I don't really know what he did on Saturday necessarily, but I think that Bear Alexander has earned some praise as of late. Seems like he's kind of coming on here a little bit. And I agree with you on Marvin Jones. They got to find some sacks somewhere. And I realize that's not easy for a freshman. make Marvin Jones your DeAndre Walker from 2017, not Walker of 2018 when he was like, kind of the main guy on the defense. Go back and look at DeAndre Walker in 2017 when you had a bunch of seniors, and you basically just said to him, hey, you're going to be our situational pass rusher. I want you to come in, and I just want you to just wreak havoc. Like, don't think, just react. Just take off and try to get there. If somebody blocks you, that's fine, but just go try to get there. And Walker had a double-digit tackle for loss season for Georgia that year. They may have to find them kind of a 2017 version of DeAndre Walker, somebody they can just kind of like wind up, turn him loose, and just see what happens. They may, and Marvin Jones may be a pretty good candidate for that. Marcus Chafin says play of the game has to be the Stark saving that touchdown. Yeah, it was incredibly valuable. Incredibly valuable. Zelo Allen says Kearis Jackson and Dominic Blaylock are proven deep threats. We should choose them and work lad back. I don't know about proven deep threats. I thought Dominic had 2 great catches on Saturday. I think that may be an indication that Dominic is on his way to playing more. And unfortunately for Kearis, if Dominic's playing more, that probably does mean Kearis is going to be playing a little bit less because they do similar things for Georgia. But I don't know that neither Kearis nor Blaylock are what I would sort of think of as proven deep threats. I think they've both been proven receivers for Georgia, and Kearis is still a very valuable player. But I think when I think about deep threat, I sort of think about something a little bit different than that. Dan Patrick says, good thing we have a good defense. And the Georgia defense did give him a chance on Saturday. Miriam Corbin, I agree with Miriam on this. She says, quarterbacks have had nothing to fear these last few games. That's troubling. Hendon Hooker's going to feast if we don't change that. I agree, Miriam. You got to get your pass rush figured out before Tennessee. I think you do. I think you do. I think you're right about that. And I think Saturday back at home again would be a good time for that to happen. Zelo Allen says Kearis led the team in receiving in 2020 over George Pickens. That's pretty proven. Yeah, I think you and I are talking about different things. I think Kearis Jackson's a proven receiver, but you call him a proven deep threat, or whoever it was that said that. Proven deep threat. I think that Kearis is a good receiver. I just don't know that I think of Kearis as a deep threat necessarily. That's all we're saying. Or at least that's all I'm saying. But yeah, I mean, Kearis had back-to-back 100-yard receiving games. Go back and look at Auburn in 2020. Go back and look at Tennessee in 2020. Those are big days for Kearis. He's a good receiver. But when it comes to like that big home run guy, I don't really think of him that way. Philip Jordan Wells says wide receivers are still a good group. They need AD Mitchell back. I think that's been, pretty obvious. I think you're right about that. I think you are indeed. All right. We got to go. Thank you for being here. R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. By the way, also check out our friends at the AJC there as well. Great time to be reading the AJC when it comes to Falcons win yesterday against Cleveland. Nick Chubb was also back, got a touchdown in his hometown, and had a bunch of folks from Cedartown on hand for the game. That was great to see. But the Falcons did get the win, which was also great to see. Braves in Miami, one skinny little win away from clinching the National League East. 5th straight division. That'd be great to see. And whole kinds of other things online there as well in the world of sports. AJC.com for that. The e-paper, also a great way to keep up to date on all that too. Online, AJC.com. You can learn more about it. Our friends at R.S. Sanders want to get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Want to get you covered on all that plumbing issues, electrical issues, water heaters going out. They got you on all of that. rsandrews.com for more. You'll have a great day. We will see you tomorrow.